Okay, we are back rolling live here at the Schwab Impact Conference in San Francisco for our last segment of the day. And we've obviously saved the best for last.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you.
So we have with us right now Bernadette Murphy, who's the Managing Director for Vigilant Compliance. Bernadette, thanks for joining us.
Great, thanks for having me. It's very exciting here at this Schwab Impact Conference. There's a lot of excitement. It's been a long 3 days, but it's been a really great showing of everyone here. So
there's literally thousands of advisors, hundreds of SMEs, subject matter experts like yourself. So we've been able to get so much great content here. So I'm really excited for this. So what we're doing today with Bernadette. So Bernadette is, as I say, with Vigilant Compliance. And amongst other things for compliance, you do a lot of work with private funds and registered funds, right?
Correct.
So Bernadette and I have been talking now for some months now, and certainly with Vigilant, because yours truly at Sovereign, we are going to launch our own registered investment company, a 40 Act fund, Gulp, right? So to kind of frame this, and I'm going to turn it over to you in just a moment. So it's almost 3 years ago. I had the idea because at Sovereign we tend to be more of a mass affluent shop. Clients that have, millions of dollars, not tens of millions of dollars, right? And we also wanted to be able to give them exposure to some alternative investments, the private credit, the private equities, but we want to do so with diversification, but we don't want to write all these different subdocs. So for those of you in the audience probably know, if you're going to do a private credit fund or a private equity fund, there's a document, right? You're not just putting in QQQ, hit enter, and you bought the thing. It's a process. It's fairly paperwork intensive, even e-paperwork intensive. So what we wanted to do is create a fund of funds. So I thought, even if this, takes $20,000 or $30,000, I'll do it. Meanwhile, it takes hundreds of thousands of dollars. But we decided to do it because our firm's about $1 billion, and we want to deliver this as a service to our clients. So we are going to launch that, and we decided to go the registered fund as opposed to private fund. With all of that said, I want to turn it over to you first. Why did I not use the private fund? Spoiler alert, we have about 1,500 clients, right? And why did we go the registered fund route? And what is the difference, please?
So there are two things to consider when you want to launch a fund. Do you want to launch a registered investment company, like a registered fund that is registered under the Investment Company Act, or a private fund that's exempt from registration? The difference here is, the major differences are the regulatory oversight, reporting, and disclosures. Also, for the private fund, there's less regulatory oversight, reporting, and disclosures. However, there are a lot of restrictions with a private fund versus a registered fund. And I'll start with the restrictions for a private fund. The private fund, depending on the type of fund, you might be restricted to 100 investors, unless they're qualified purchasers, where you might be able to have 2,000 investors in the fund.
Right.
And you can't market.
What's a qualified purchaser?
So a qualified purchaser is someone who has $5 million in investments.
Right. So kind of like an accredited investor plus, right? So
That's
accredited is $1 million or whatever the income is, $2,000 or $3,000.
It's $200,000 for an individual. Income, or $300,000 with a spouse, or $1 million in net worth excluding your primary residence.
Right. So for those of you keeping track in the audience, that's for an accredited investor.
That's right.
And a qualified purchaser, same idea, but it's a higher level with $5 million.
$5 million.
Okay.
Correct.
So with the private funds, I just want to make sure everyone's getting this because it's important. And we're not going to go too much into the weeds, but these are some important criteria. For the private fund, less expensive, easier to set up.
Quicker to set up.
A lot quicker.
If you have the right team in place, you could do it in a month. We have done it in a month before. But the other thing about a private fund is you cannot generally solicit. So a private fund is exempt, uses an exemption from registration as an investment company, because now you're only marketing to accredited investors or qualified purchasers.
Right.
And I should say, you're not soliciting to the general public. You have to have a substantive pre-existing relationship with these investors.
Right.
And then you're capped, and that's it. And then you would have to launch another fund. With a registered fund, there's a lot more to it. It takes a lot more time. There's a lot more regulatory oversight. You have to have a board. You have to have specific service providers. fund administrator and accounting, transfer agent, distributor,
compliance, auditor.
Compliance, auditor,
Yeah,
right, so
yeah.
there's a whole bunch of things, and all of those, all of your financial statements, you have annual and semi-annual reporting that
Yep.
everyone can see. So everything is out there.
Right.
But the minimums are so much lower, if like super, super low, and there aren't as many barriers for new investors. So
Right.
that's why you would launch a registered fund
Yes.
versus a private fund, because you really are very limited with a private fund. But that's okay for some people because they don't want to be out there. And with a private fund, you're not posting a prospectus on your website.
Right.
You're only showing those documents to your accredited investors or qualified purchasers. It's a private placement memorandum. And then you have your individual subdocs and the limited partnership agreements, a lot of paperwork back and forth. But if you have a fund, you have one fund or multiple funds. That fund is your client, technically not the underlying investors.
Exactly.
So you're not worrying about the subdocs. It's the transfer agent and all of your service providers who are doing the work on the back end, and you have a pooled investment vehicle where you're managing the assets, but you don't have to worry about all the investors underneath.
That's right. I think that's a good way to sum that up. So let me dumb it down just even a little bit more to most basic terms, because it took me months to kind of figure this out when I started this. So, and you keep me honest though, tell me if this is not pretty much spot on. Private fund, really ideal if you have a relatively low number of clients, because you're capped at 100.
Right.
If they're accredited.
If it's a particular type of fund.
Yes. You're about to say all those numbers that no one's
I'm
going to
not
understand.
gonna say, I know.
Good catch. I saw that. But basically, there's a type of private fund for accredited investors that will let you put in 100. There's another type of private fund, still relatively easy to set up for qualified purchasers if you happen to have a lot of $5 million investors. We don't necessarily have that at our shop. We're a little bit more mass affluent. Then you can go up to 2,000. Right, if they're qualified purchasers. That's still the private fund. Private funds pros, easier to set up, a lot less expensive to set up, but the cons are you're limited to 100 or 2,000 investors, but the 2,000 would be qualified purchasers. So we looked at that, and our shop has about 1,500 households, so we're going to blow through that pretty quickly. So we looked at the registered. So the registered fund route, the good news there is you can put as many people as you want. Right?
And you can advertise.
And you can advertise and do all kinds of really cool things.
As long as you stay within the rules of the advertising.
Well, that's why we hire you guys.
Exactly,
Keep us in line. But the downside, and this is a big downside, it's taken me a year and a half to get to the point where we're about to launch, like in about 3 months, maybe 2 or 3 months. And so it's going to be almost 2 years, right? Now, it was a little slower for me because there was a bit of a learning curve. And the expenses, which could vary, obviously, we don't know exactly what it's going to cost you in the audience, but I would say, generally speaking, for a private fund, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars a year. For a registered fund, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars per year, right? So you need to make sure you have the scale. So for us, with 1,500 clients, we're happy absorbing that because we're delivering we think is going to be a great value for these clients that's going to be hard for them to replicate elsewhere. So we're happy to do that. But if you're a shop that only has 100 clients, the private fund seems to be the no-brainer. So that's how I would kind of sum it up.
And some people just don't have the appetite to go into the weeds of launching a registered fund.
Not to mention,
because there's so many moving pieces, or they don't want to wait. They want to have the private fund, and they have enough of a network where they can get those assets under management.
Right. So this is probably a good time to pivot over to the growth we've seen, right? So the interest in alternative investments, hockey sticking.
Definitely.
The interest in private funds and registered funds, I think the same, yeah? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so year over year, last year, we've seen growth of a little over 13% for the registered funds and about 5% over private funds. So the need or desire is not going away.
Yeah.
And what I'm seeing is, say you have a typical RIA, registered investment advisor, where they have, we call them separately managed accounts. They would consider them their individual client accounts.
Okay.
So where they have individual client accounts, but they're thinking about how are we going to grow our business? How can we have, instead of 400 accounts, how can we have more, how can we reach more people? So an RIA might have maybe $100,000 as a minimum before they'll enter into an agreement with an investor.
Right.
Where if you start a fund, it can be zero. I mean, it could be a couple dollars, like whatever
Sure.
the minimum is, whatever you would choose as a minimum. So you
Because
don't,
it's so scalable, right?
it's very scalable, and they want to be able to increase their market presence, right? They want to be able to market their product or a fund to, or whatever type of service they have, to more than their 400 separately managed accounts. But they also don't want to have 1,000 accounts of $200.
Right.
So if they launch a mutual fund or an ETF or another fund with a lower minimum, they have one fund.
Right.
That is the client, and they can have thousands of investors. So now
Right.
they're opening up themselves to additional revenue, because really the bottom line is you want to be able to make more money, right? Nobody's volunteering here.
Without
right?
question.
The second thing we're seeing is they want to be able to offer more options to their existing clients like you.
Yeah,
right?
I think the latter, I talk to a lot of advisors,
Yep.
I know you do too, but it's so important in the RIA space or the advisory space in general to be able to have more and more value proposition offers for your clients, whether that's easier access to alternative investments. That's what we're looking to do with this fund. Or easier access to tax preparation or estate planning or estate organization. Long gone are the days, I mean, I started in this business 30 years ago, calling up people, selling them one stock at a time.
Right.
Arguably not a whole lot of value in that anymore, right? And there's not even as much value in just putting together your plain vanilla portfolios. You have to have a differentiator, and that should include things like planning, whether it's financial planning and estate planning, some tax planning, and alternative investments through these funds. And I think we're going to see a lot more of them down the road.
Sometimes what I see too is you might have an RIA who's managing, say, 100 to 200 individual client accounts.
Yep.
Then they decide, you know what, with the same strategy, because typically they have a strategy, their niche, they decide I want to launch a registered fund with that same strategy.
Yep.
So now I can expand my investor base. But now maybe I also want to launch a hedge fund, a private fund. Maybe it's a little bit different from the exact strategy, or then maybe they'll say, we want to launch an ETF. So it just depends on the desire of the manager, what they're excited about. Some managers just want to do, they just want to manage their separate accounts, and they're happy with that.
Sure.
But then some other managers might want more of a branding opportunity, where, hey, if you have a fund and your fund is doing great, people know who you are now.
Sure.
So if you build it, they will come, right? So now you have you have brand recognition, and the better your brand recognition, the more investors. And so as you launch subsequent funds, whether it's private or not so much private really, but really in the registered fund space, you have more interest, and the money does start to come in a little bit quicker.
Okay, well that seems like a good place to put a pin in it for now.
Okay.
And this is going to evolve into almost like a little sub-series of goRIAs, like watch Chuck build his fund.
Right.
So we'll have you back.
Great.
So hopefully it's going to go well, because if not, I'm going to call you out on it.
Okay.
We're trusting you guys.
Well, you're in good hands.
I believe I am. Okay. So that's it for our coverage of Schwab Impact 2024. I am already looking forward to Schwab Impact 2025, because this is my first time at Schwab, and it's been fantastic.
It's great.
So thanks for helping me close out the session today.
Thank you.
All right. And on behalf of goRIA, fueled by Investment News, for the last time today at Schwab Impact, I'm Chuck Vela, and I'll see you soon at some other conference. Thanks for joining us, and Bernadette, thank you.
Thank you.